listen-only mode.
Hello, my name is Brittany Kavinsky, and I just want to welcome everyone. It is now 1 p.m., so we will begin our presentation shortly. Today, on November 4th, we have our presentation on Design Guidelines for Small Towns and Rural Places, given by Belinda Stewart and Bob Barber. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box and we will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. Here's a list of the sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible. As you can see, we have quite a few webcasts coming up in the next few months. To register for these upcoming webcasts, please visit www.utah-apa.org/webcasts and register for your webcast of choice. We are now offering distance education webcasts to help you get your ethics or law credits before the end of the year. These webcasts are available to view at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. To log your distance education CM credits, go to www.planning.org/CM, select Activities by Provider, select APA Ohio Chapter, then select Distance Education and select your webcast of choice. You can now follow us on Twitter @PlanningWebcast or like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast Series sponsored by chapters, divisions, and universities. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM, select today's date, which is Friday, November 4th, and then select today's webcast, Design Guidelines for Small Towns and Rural Places. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We are recording today's webcast and it will be available along with a 6-slide per page PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. At this time, I would like to introduce Dave Gaddis, who's going to be introducing our moderator for the day, Joanne Garnett, and she will be introducing our speakers for today, Belinda Stewart and Bob Barber.
Hi, I'm Dave Gaddis, Deputy City Manager for Benbrook, Texas, and Chair of APA's Small Town and Rural Planning Division, also known as STAR. And I'd like to welcome you to our second annual STAR-sponsored webinar. STAR is a group of about 500 small town and rural planners with the mission of promoting and supporting planning excellence in the small town and rural level and to facilitate communication among small town planners. Current activities include organizing sessions and mobile workshops at the National Conference of APA that are of interest to small town and rural planners. In fact, this webinar was based on a session that was presented at the 2010 New Orleans Conference. And just a heads up, we're planning a mobile workshop in the Los Angeles Conference to Catalina Island, so keep an eye out for that. We also publish a quarterly electronic newsletter called Small Town and Rural Planning, as well as other periodic email updates, and we have sites on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. We also hold an annual awards program celebrating excellence in small town and rural planning. We nominate worthy candidates for election to AICP's College of Fellows who are sometimes overlooked by their chapters. We also monitor and support legislation at the federal level that affects small town and rural planning. Last year we participated in Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack's Regional Summit, and we're gearing up for this year's reauthorization of the Rural Development Program in the Farm Bill. And finally, we've provided internship support to graduate students to gain work experience in small town and rural settings. This year, we funded 3 students who were awarded internships that worked in both North Carolina and Kansas. If you'd like more information on STAR or how to join, our webpage is listed on the slide. So now I'd like to introduce Joanne Garnett, who will be moderating today's session. She has over 30 years experience as a professional planner, working primarily in the upper Mountain West region of the country, which is kind of hard to believe because she's not that old. I'm not sure how she got 30 years experience in. She's currently principal of Orion Planning Group, and she offices out of Sheridan, Wyoming, and I assume there's snow on the ground there right now. She's been very active in APA over the years, including at the chapter, and you may know her as being the national president of AICP back in the mid-90s and president of APA at large in 2001. And she's still active in the Sheridan area, currently serving on the Downtown Sheridan Association board. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joanne.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. And no, there's no snow yet here, but there is snow up in the Bighorns in my backyard. So what we're going to be talking about today is the importance of where we live, work, play, because it all matters to us. Because whether it's a historic community that we're talking about or one that's newly developed or one that's been in place for a while, what surrounds us truly matters. I think basically we want to live in areas and communities that really resonate with character and showcase everything that's special and unique about that place. One way that we as planners can do something about maintaining the character and showcasing what's special is by paying attention to the design of our communities. So with that, this session is going to focus on the design standards for small towns and rural places. We have two fantastic presenters. The first one is Belinda Stewart, AIA, and Belinda is the principal of Belinda Stewart Architects, PA, which is a small rural architectural firm specializing in historic preservation as well as new construction in historically significant environments. Belinda moved to her hometown area 21 years ago and established her firm in the small town of Eupora, Mississippi, with a population of 2,500. She lives in the nearby village of Walthall, where she is serving her fourth term as mayor. Her firm has helped plan, seek funding, and or implement many successful projects throughout the region, and they have received more than 35 design and or preservation awards, primarily for new or rehabilitated public facilities. Bob Barber, FAICP, has served as the Director of Planning for Hernando, Mississippi since 1996. Focusing on planning and development policy for preservation, design, placemaking, and smart growth principles. Hernando was recently named one of the top 100 best small towns in America. Bob is also a partner with the Orion Planning Group, which is our firm, a full-service planning consulting firm. He's the current president-elect of the Mississippi chapter of the American Planning Association and is past chair of the Chapter President's Council for APA. He's been a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners since 1990 and was admitted as a fellow in the association in 2010. He's executive committee member of the Memphis District Council of the Urban Land Institute, executive board member of the Mid-South Regional Design Center, and he served as adjunct faculty at the University of Memphis Graduate Program in City Planning. So with that, I will turn this over to Belinda.
All right. Thank you, Joanne. First, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk about small towns and rural areas and about the importance of design and about the opportunities to use design in those communities. Oh, dear. Okay, had a little difficulty there. I primarily am going to be talking about, and the images that you're going to be seeing are going to be based on examples that are here in my hometown of Eupora, where our office is located. This is a picture that you're seeing from the 1950s, and it was a very vibrant small town, like many were in that decade, in that era. And we're fortunate that our downtown still looks a lot like that, and but with a lot of changes around it. But I want to talk a bit about what we've done here, but also talk about ways that this type of looking at small buildings can be used in other communities, and also about why design guidelines are important, particularly in small towns and rural areas, and how they can be used to enable, to teach, to motivate, to encourage, and to really be a bigger help than they might otherwise be, or at least a bigger percentage of the help than in larger towns. The I think now when you look at the vernacular of what's happening in small towns around the country, we now have kind of a national Home Depot, Lowe's, building supply store hardware. We can get almost any material anywhere and build in the same way anywhere. And it creates buildings that sometimes look the same anywhere in the country. And you see all over the country metal buildings or very similar buildings that we can now throw up quickly and inexpensively. And I think in some ways that is our vernacular of the day. Most of our small towns were built based on what the vernacular was in that area at the time, which was not national. It was what was available locally. What were the national resources? What was the environment? What was the topography? And now we have many, many ways to overcome those things and do things at a much more national level. But that's a danger to small towns especially. And I think what used to happen naturally by what was available there and what people knew, we now have to do by choice. And I think that's where where design guidelines can really step in and create tools that allow people to do that in a positive way. And this is a view of our town about a year ago, and this is the same downtown from a slightly different angle, and a very small rural area, low buildings, but has its own distinct character. And I think that's one of the first things to start with is really the identification of what that distinct character is. What is the vernacular of the area? What's the local language? Why is this community different from other places? What are the stories that make this area unique? I believe that our buildings and our places, they embody this history. They embody memory. They embody the energy of the people before us who did these great things in our communities, or perhaps these common things, but these things that now create what our community is about. And identifying what the patterns are, what were the materials, what were the details, what are the things that really make this community local, unique to that environment. And I think it's all local. I think you have to look beyond design, you have to look beyond buildings, and look at the really big picture. Quite often when you come into town, a planner or an architect professional comes into town, in a small town or rural area, we may be the only person working there at the time. We may be the only person working there for years. And I think it's incumbent upon us to help folks look at their community in a bigger picture, in a bigger way. So looking at local politics, architecture, culture, art, all the different things that help make up that community, it's important, I think, to help folks look at that, to help give them an objectivity, help them really see what is great about that community, because when you're there forever, we all know you lose that objectivity. Local politics, people are passionate about their politics, and identifying what's going on and involving politicians in the process is very important. Local history, a lot of people are passionate about history. A lot of people don't know what the history is in a community, and helping to highlight that and helping to identify it is very important. Whether it's the early history or whether it's more recent history, positive history, or even negatives that have happened in the past that are now very critical. And then local culture. There are all kinds of things that make communities unique and different. And for example, in the Mississippi Delta, you never know what you're going to see when you drive through. But these are armadillo races. But there are many, many unique things that folks need to understand, see, and appreciate in their own communities. Local art, all communities have artists, and quite often they're sort of buried in the woodwork, and encouraging communities to actually seek out who their artists are and the uniqueness and wonderfulness, and helping highlight that is very important. Local characters. These were a couple in our local community we had no idea about a few years ago. The one on the left was claimed to be a Confederate veteran. Turned out he wasn't. But he is the person who established the Natchez Trace Parkway that goes through several states in our area, or started that effort. And the person on the right was from our area and turned out to be the assistant director of the FBI for years and started all of their training programs. And we now have events and highlight what they've done. Local music.
Belinda,
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you just for one sec. I'm receiving several questions regarding the sound.
Mm-hmm.
And it has And I don't know
And
whether
also my computer just locked up, I think.
that the people are having a little bit of a problem hearing you, and
Okay.
I'm just
Let me test. I'm turning up volume. Is that helping?
okay. I'm fine hearing you, but I just wanted to
Okay.
flag that for you, that the connection was sounding kind of gravelly,
Okay.
and so I just wanted to alert you to that. So I apologize for breaking in, but I just wanted to let you know that.
No, that's okay. Thank you. And
Yeah.
let me know if you continue to get messages, and I'll try again
Okay.
to change the
Thank
phone.
you.
Okay. All right. And back to, oh, and I don't know why my computer's doing this. Okay. All right. And local music, I'm going to go through these more quickly. Local music is again, so important to a community. Okay. And Mississippi, for example, has really taken advantage of the blues, and any community can now go out and ask for and document having a marker in their community, which brings tourism, brings people, and creates more local pride and helps identify more of the uniqueness of that community. The local economy, local industry, knowing what is going on in that community, what are the unique issues of the environment there, how can those be brought to light to encourage that pride, again, in community and people being objective and knowing what's going on in the community. Food is an important issue. Events. This is based on Katrina, one of our huge local events in Mississippi. And local architecture and local spaces and local design is here what we're primarily to talk about. And what makes your architecture local? That's, I think, a very important part of beginning design guidelines is looking at the buildings, looking at the design elements in a community. What is it that makes those different from other places? What is that local language, the vernacular language of the local built environment? What are the common materials? What are the colors, forms, shapes, sizes? Looking at all of those things that create that local feel, those common elements that are in the community. Looking at detailing and elements. These become the base. All of these elements we're talking about become the base of what design guidelines can be developed on. And I think they also become the pride point and the strengthening of the people you're going to leave behind who are going to help evolve these guidelines and help oversee these guidelines as the community develops. Our town, for example, is a railroad town. This depot is one of the early buildings, and the reason the town grew is because of the railroad. It was a very, very small community and then grew by 2,000 people or so in just about 10 or 15 years. So that's our primary period of developing. And understanding that and looking at the buildings that happened during that time period has been an important base of knowledge for us to develop what happens in the community now. Looking at, we're a very pedestrian community. We have a lot of housing very close to our downtown area. A lot of people walk in our community, and being able to now encourage that more, and even more importantly, to protect that so that we don't lose that over the years as sidewalks become deteriorated, et cetera. And these are just examples looking at a couple of other communities that are one about an hour north of us, one about an hour south. And most of what I'm looking at are things that architects or designers were not involved in. These were buildings that developed over time. And the slides on the left and the images on the right, you can see a distinct difference in character in the ornateness of these and the way they developed. And those are the kind of details that can be found and can be tangibly described and shown and used to help set up what guidelines can be in the future. I think guidelines can enable a town. It's very important that that guidelines be left as something a community can do, that there's not this image of what they're telling folks what they cannot do. And I think the key to doing that is to give lots of tools and to give lots of information that helps enable people to figure out what they can do. describe how to do things, describe why to do things, also create what I call a network of assistance, which may be a listing of agencies, of institutions, individuals, folks who can help, others who have similar issues, perhaps a network of other communities who can help with the community you're working in, possibilities of potential grants and other funding, ways of finding grants, tax credits, Secretary of the Interior standards, basically putting together this network of information that's going to help in the long run as buildings and spaces become developed in the community. And I think also, just as importantly, help bring to the light many of the personal stories that are embedded in these structures and in these places, because quite often that story is the thing that grabs people and grabs their attention and helps create the energy that can help restore buildings or create energy to develop a downtown, for example. And these are just some of the images in our town where we've gone back and found all of the historic photos we can. We continue looking for historic photos, and then basically paired them with the same building now so that we can help show the folks who are buying buildings or developing buildings, here's what this building looked like at one time. Here's a starting point that you could use to go by. The building, this image on the upper left was the way we found this building. Then we found the photographs and brought these to light of what the building had looked like at one time, which helped create the energy and the motivation to uncover the building and restore that facade back more to its original condition. And this is just another example. The images in the upper right are a historical group who got together, raised money, created awareness to save this little jail building in the bottom right, which is now a small village hall. And one of our buildings on downtown, and researching how that building was used and who used that building helped to bring the energy to bring it back to life. And I think design guidelines can help teach in a community. Doing this research or enabling the local people to do the research and bring this information out and available, it again is helping to create soldiers, if you may, after you're gone, that are going to help keep the importance and the significance of these guidelines alive, helping to celebrate these stories and people and the significance that come out when you learn about all of these things that make this community local, helping to identify and describe, what are some of the more significant elements, how to help prioritize some of the things that can be looked at in the community. And I think showing lots of examples about how to do it is very important, teaching people how they can help encourage growth in their community and how they can help see growth get done, and again helping identify what that local character is. Again, this is another historic image of our downtown, and in the upper left corner are some of the old Sanborn insurance maps in our area, and our community has purchased copies of all of the Sanborn insurance maps, make those available so that folks can see from that standpoint how things evolved in the community. And another historic photograph, and we've outlined which of these buildings in the background are still there. And this is a local depot that you saw in an earlier picture, what it looked like about 10 years ago. And then also the importance of establishing the places around buildings and looking at, this had been an early park that was lost 50 years ago, and helping create the energy and the importance of why that park needed to be brought back. And these are tools that we have these one-sheet fact sheets that kind of tell the story of different projects. And when you put all of those together, it makes a very nice packet that can be given to folks to show, here are a lot of examples about how other people have brought buildings back to life or how they've built new buildings in this area of historic, or with buildings that are very similar. And here's an example of a different use, and showing how, just giving folks examples of how former, actually the only thing left of this building was the facade, but showing how the character could be kept by keeping the facade, and then a housing was built behind this. And this is an example, just as we've worked on varying projects in the community every year, we do a Christmas card that involves one of the newly found historic photographs in the community. And we have about 1,500 people that this gets sent out to, and it's amazing how much pride just that one little picture that gets broadcast every year, how much pride that brings, how many people call and say, I remember that, let me tell you something about it. And it also, things in those photographs gain a little bit more value in the community. And again, as we've been saying, case studies are just so important, gathering these examples from similar towns, spending the time to go beyond what is here, and also looking at how did other people solve these problems and making that information available as part of the guidelines. And these are from other towns, and these are two different buildings, but it's just an example of showing what that building could look like. And this, for example, the bottom left is the way it was found, the historic picture above, and then a rendering, a watercolor rendering was done to show what that might look like to the community, which then gave the motivation for the community to raise the funding to see that come to fruition, and that's the completed photograph in the bottom right. And this is an example of new construction that was completed based on the kind of things we're talking about. This building was based on the character of the design of the downtown buildings, similar heights, similar materials, but not copying a lot of the elements, making things different about the building, but also incorporating the stories. The picture in the upper left has 3 quilt patterns etched into the side of the building. This community is very much about quilts. They have master quilters who are exhibited in the Smithsonian. So part of putting this project together included a quilting competition, which then the winners were etched into the side of the building, and it's amazing how much pride and attention that has brought to this part of the community now. And these are, this was the view that you saw coming into our town here. That was not a very attractive view when the roads were changed over time and the new entrance into town came in through the backsides of buildings. We have to look at what could happen there. And this is a picture of how that was developed, a very low cost turnaround with actually with a local group of investors who put private money into bringing this back to life. And these, again, are rendering examples, which if there's a way to incorporate this kind of before and after into the design guidelines, it's extremely valuable to show some key examples of how some buildings could be brought back, or key examples of not reconstructions, but new construction that are compatible to the community. And this is an example of a new structure after Katrina, replacing some lost buildings there, and highlighting and bringing back some of the detailing, some of the character of those lost buildings, and how important it was to keep that local character. And I think design guidelines can also encourage and motivate, and as we've been talking about, they certainly encourage people to appreciate and therefore to protect what they have, to protect the character and also the history of their community, and making that jump between understanding that the buildings and the places those are where our stories are embodied, and keeping those and reflecting those in our new design, are not necessarily reflecting it, being compatible with and honoring those with what we build back becomes an important part of protecting that character and protecting that history. Design guidelines can help leave communities proactive. They can leave them flexible, giving a lot of different ideas, a lot of different case stories, gives a lot of information no matter what happens in the future. You want to enable communities to be prepared, to be confident, and to be ready to face whatever comes up into their community. And this is an example here in ours where we had a fire and lost one of our buildings, and then the tools that can come together now to help show what can be built back in that place are very important. And this is an example of the building to the left is the historical view of the site. These buildings are the ones that burned. This is a view shortly before the fire. And then these are examples in the community of the kind of building perhaps just the kind of form, the kind of shape, the kind of size that could be built back in that area. And then the grid and the space is given an idea of sort of the maximum size that should be built into the space and the kind of structure that is appropriate from a form standpoint to be put into that space. And this is just a small tool we use here where we put together a poster of images from our buildings around town, some of our key buildings, some of our common buildings, and it's just kind of a simple, kind of dumb tool where if we just put a rendering of what we think the new building is going to look like there, it's just a checkpoint. Okay, are we compatible? Are we going to fit into this community? And then I think above all, remember to keep it local, remembering to help folks really take advantage of what their community is already about and to make that better and to protect what they have, protect that history, and above all to have the tools to do so. I think we have a responsibility when we go into a community to help provide those tools and to help gather the appropriate tools that work best with their local situation. And any way that local folks can be involved in this process is going to improve it. The more people that can be involved, the more people that are going to be active and protecting this process in the future. And always highlight what the community can do and create an image and an environment of positive growth, positive development, and not about what the community can't do or won't do. And this is our small town euphoria from the air, and hasn't changed a lot over the years, but what we are trying to be about is smart growth. And the design guidelines and the information and the tools that have been brought together through this process that's the key and that's the roadmap that's going to help take us into the future in a positive way. We really want our local character to shine through, and I think that should be the goal in any community we work with, but particularly in small and rural communities, is find the gems in the community, not necessarily just the building, but find the stories, find the energy, the politics, the history, the culture, learn it, help them learn it, help them see it, highlight it, celebrate it, teach it, and use it to inform and guide the future. Let what is local about our communities be the base of what our future becomes, and we get stronger and better as we go. All right, and I'm going to turn this over now to Bob. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Belinda. Bob?
Yes, Belinda, thank you. I'm going to try to show my screen. And how are we? Okay. I'm assuming my screen is up. I certainly see it on my computer. Belinda, thank you. Really do excellent work. Graphics are great. And as we've discussed, talking about design guidelines for small towns and rural places, we've sort of divided the presentation between what Belinda has just covered, those historic cores of small towns and communities, and then the qualities of the design issues related to that, and then the second division being everything else that's not necessarily the historic core. And I start my section of the presentation with just a couple of quotes out of our local paper to illustrate the point of understanding and really valuing the significance of place. There are two quotes here just from new residents commenting on the court square in the community of where I'm director. Well, the person says, I just kind of fell in love with it. And then the following comment saying that the resident settled on the town, quote, because of the quaintness of the town and the good feeling about the town. And that's what these kinds of places, the most loved places, exhibit in communities, a quaintness, a charm, and I'm trying to advance my slide. There we go. A quaintness, a charm that most people understand and know when they see it, but don't really have an understanding of what makes up good space and good quality place. And so that's what I wanted to work through as we go through my section of the presentation. The two slides here illustrating two commercial areas. There's automobiles associated with each, but an obvious choice as to how each place is to be constructed and the character in which these two places reflect. What is it? Why is it that the lower right is so much more satisfying a place and space than the upper left? And as we consider those places, the challenge in my practice as a city planner is that I was not trained in design. My graduate studies covered no design issues, yet these form the very core of the quality of building quality space in a community. And I've stated here as a dilemma of a design challenged city planner. Traditional zoning and regulatory control of the built environment results in poor design quality. There's no question of that, and it's been shown time and again. Form-based coding will typically lead to a very high design quality. Form-based coding is often not an option in at least the rural places and small towns that I'm so familiar with because of a variety of reasons, political, complexity, and so forth. And most planners don't do design well. And here's the dilemma. Great communities will not happen without a design component in planning. And so that leads us to the question then of how do we understand places, and I'm trying to, it's my slides again, and avoid mistakes such as what you see here, where in Hernando, for instance, the building on the upper right was destroyed and demolished for the Jewel of Progress, I'm sorry, on the upper left, for the Jewel of Progress on the lower right of your screen. And then we end up with this kind of issue that is on the outskirts or an integral part of many, if not most, small towns in America. And no one can be proud of the design characteristics that this displays, and often leads to the opinion that perhaps planners should not be favored because they're unable to produce the kinds of places that people love and want. So the challenge then is to understand what makes for excellent place design, typically demonstrated in the most loved places in a community, and then apply those principles in new spaces. And as I have practiced planning over the years, these 5 qualities that you see here are the most important qualities in good place design. They are repeatedly displayed, whether in the historic areas or newly constructed areas, those being enclosure, order, scale, outdoor activity, and meaning. And so we will work through those over the next few minutes to give an overview of those qualities and then how it can be built. And as you look at the building blocks of place design, the qualities are down the left side of the ledger that we're aiming at trying to achieve. And then on the right side of the ledger, those are a listing of a finite number of elements that can be arranged to create the kinds of quality space. It only occurs in 3 dimensions: horizontal, vertical, and what I call spatial or depth, or the 3rd dimension. And then we have the added element at the bottom of meaning and detail. So if we can understand how those places are arranged to create the qualities on the left, qualities will be created. Let's take the first one, enclosure. Very simple example. Just a suburban style bank with a deep setback and a parking lot sitting out in front. This is the typical way of construction, but through understanding the principle of enclosure, we can simply pull that building to the street, not have such a deep setback, and then place parking to the side and rear of the building. And I hope that you can see my mouse on the screen as we go through the slides so I can kind of illustrate that. But as we pull the building up tight to the street, it then encloses the space. People get a sense of comfort and safety in a space, in an enclosed space like that. This is a typical run-of-the-mill strip shopping center, an ordinary place. And a lot of these slides are just ordinary places. But after all, you know, we live our lives in ordinary moments and ordinary places. But great communities are made out of treating ordinary places and spaces well. This is a typical shopping area, trying to demonstrate enclosure on the site with this vast parking area, wide open confinement or definition to the space, is contrasted with another strip shopping center. But again, space is enclosed even with the parking and the curbing. The landscaping provides a sense of framing and enclosure to that space. And this is just a wider shot at it to demonstrate with the design standards producing the definition that you see in the parking lot space and to provide that enclosure. Again, we're working on the vertical plane of our matrix. In these two slides, we simply compare the importance of enclosure even on the back of a building. 360-degree design on a site would require that the rear of the building be treated similarly or like the front of the building. And why is that important? Because in the upper slide you see here, it is very difficult to get any kind of activity against the back of that building other than storage, garbage, dumpsters, and stuff. Whereas the slide on the bottom, if the design is treated right, 360 degrees, we can generate compatible activities. This is the back of the same building. This is a walkway leading up to a public park. And in the lower left, you see the back of Walmart directly adjacent to a public park. It all works together, and I can only ask you to imagine the difficulty or the discomfort that would occur if this were the run-of-the-mill back of the store piled full of junk, and we wouldn't be able to generate the part in that space there. So it's in sort of using space efficiently in 360-degree design, and the values play out and show that that's a wise move. Some other examples, again, this is one that pulls an office building up close to the street, moves parking to the side and the rear. That's a simple principle. If repeated over and over and over, can make dramatic changes in the streetscape. This is near the historic core of the town, similar to what Belinda was showing, but again, trying to enclose and frame the street. So ways to achieve: build two lines, very important, rather than minimum setbacks. Minimize upfront parking, putting it to the side and the rear. And then mandatory heights or height to street ratios that has the effect of pressuring buildings up rather than keeping them too short so that a street is framed. Then we move to the quality of scale. And when I mean scale, I mean human scale. We're speaking of building places that accommodate people or appear to accommodate people and not automobiles. These are two dramatically different slides, obviously. It's very easy to conclude that the slide on the right is made for cars. The slide on the left accommodates cars, but is general in more certain terms is constructed to accommodate people. All right, if I can advance my slide again. There we go. And one of the worst offenders, and I do not mean to pick on Walmart, this could be any big box store, but one of the worst offenders is this vast sheet of asphalt that provides no enclosure as in the first quality, but is on a scale to totally keep up with human activity. And here, when a parking lot is broken up, we do achieve better scale for people, which is what we're after. This just a couple of examples of a long blank wall with no opening or penetration. It would have been quite easy to establish in this side of this wall false windows, even in the brickwork, that give it a better appearance and scale it down for human activity. And in the lower right, you will see that that very thing has been done. Those windows are false. They are not real, but they do give the sense of activity that we are looking for. Sidewalks convey that. As you see here, it can be inferred or implied that people are going to use the sidewalk, so that site is scaled for people while accommodating the automobiles. So ways to achieve it: extensive landscaping provisions in parking areas, making sidewalks mandatory, bike facilities, street furniture, facade designs, as I mentioned, the windows and doors that we have. Now, the third quality, and I know I'm probably moving rapidly, but I must to complete it. The third quality I mentioned is order, where we take a site that is illustrated. This is any typical rural spot, which is a site, I consider it a site of chaos, really. There's signs, there's dumpsters, there's no control, it's just a mess. So if we can bring order out of this site through a standard or through a design standard, that would be a way to design. And I take this example of a Waffle House, which we have in the southeast, and consider this building itself a rather disorderly product. There's no real coherent theme to it, but through appropriate facade standards and treatments, we are very easily we can easily and without much expense convert that space into an asset to the community, rather than the generic place that it was. And here, the same principle applies to the franchise architecture of Walgreens, again applying facade treatments to the site. As we look at this, we can give the sense of porches and balconies to convey activity, which I'll cover in a moment, but it brings far more order to the site. This is a typical gas station out in a big box store parking lot with just chaotic consumerism splashed all over the place, and you got to walk back up in here somewhere to pay for your gas. Appropriate design coding that pays attention to the orderliness of a site will generate what's on the bottom right rather than what's up in the upper left here. It's providing order to a site as disorderly and chaotic. And then there's another example of a convenience store. This slide is from the Dark Skies site that Arizona is promoting, the Dark Skies movement. And I categorize it in order because, under the quality of order, because typically if lighting is not covered in standards, it's allowed to bleed over on adjoining properties and really become a hazard. So lighting standards become important, maintaining light on the site so that it does not create its own sense of chaos and disorder. And I think from that discussion, hopefully you can draw your own conclusions about the options of the orderliness of these two Kentucky Fried Chicken stores and how they would fit into the townscape. One more I'll show you. This is an AutoZone. It's the back of an AutoZone. This is one constructed under standards that do a number of things we've discussed. One, puts the parking to the side, pulls the building up to the street for enclosure. provides that sense of scale. If you can see here, there are areas for windows, at least call-outs for windows that gives a sense of scale. And then it's obviously much more orderly than the building before it. Now, in the economic development terms for a community, this site, typically AutoZone is going to move about or go somewhere else, and a community will be left trying to re-employ this site into the townscape. And it becomes quite a proposition because it looks like a dead AutoZone. However, this site could be any number of uses. It's a reusing and recycling of a building, could be a doctor's office, dress shop, any number of things, which is exactly the kind of characteristic that's exhibited on town squares and main streets throughout America. Buildings 100, 200 years old have been used over and over and over and recycled through the community. And that's a quality that we're after. I put this slide up to illustrate a subtle detail, which is the coloring of a site, in this case the parking lot striping. Typically they're striped in white, and you see these guys doing the painting up here on the upper left. Typically they're striped in yellow, which is the color of crime scene tape, and you see the crime scene on the right, and that gives a site a sort of a sense of alarm and discomfort when you go onto a site. So one detail that we use is softening of site colors with simply striping white, and you can see the site at the bottom is far more pleasant to view. So ways to achieve order: minimizing color schemes, exterior material requirements, careful consideration of sign control, parking and traffic definition with curbing and so forth, architectural design respectful of existing community character, and controlling outside storage. Just two more. This one is activity. I love this slide because it illustrates human nature, and that human nature will express itself. It cannot be suppressed. So when I look at the building on the left, and this is in relation to activity, when I look at the building on the left, an old building devoid of any activity, the need for people to relate to other people in the townscape or otherwise is so very important that this person has gone back and painted people on the building, fake people, to give the sense of activity. Well, this is not the way to convey activity in the townscape. The building on the right has been reconstructed to do it more organically by using the device of a balcony. And the balcony has furniture on it, which is not required by design standards. But the balcony itself conveys the activity in a way that is more satisfying and organic in community and more natural. And this is the front of that building, exhibiting that characteristic of activity. The sidewalk, again, we mentioned as a part of human scale. It also conveys the quality of activity. And I take this slide, it's a little grainy, but I take it to show you what can you infer about these two sites in this slide. There's a store at the upper part and a store at the lower part. The upper part obviously is accommodative of human activity, and the lower part is a place that is dangerous, and watch out, your car is going to be turning in there quick. So the need to accommodate human activity. The ordinary tire store, again, we can put a porch on that. And I realize we've got people from all over the country, and in the South, porches and balconies are important. There are regional variations and nuances, but there are ways to convey that sense of activity on these sites, because we're building places for people, not machines. It is a principle of life, and it is a principle of comfort in the community that we be able to convey a sense of life and health and vitality in a place. So to facilitate activity, there are some ways. I won't go through those. You can glance at those. Those are ways that design guidelines can accommodate it. And then finally, I share the quality, memory, and meaning, which Belinda so eloquently covered. Too often These buildings, as in the upper left, are lost in the community, the old depot having been destroyed here in this town, as in a lot of places. However, there's nothing that prevents a community from encouraging the reconstructing reconstruction of that space that evokes the memory of the place that so many people will embody in the community. And in this case, the little strip center, which evokes the memory of the depot, is very successful, and it naturally fits in the townscape because of what was there in the past. And there's another shot of it. This is intended to illustrate the opposite of meaning, and this is absurdity. This is in a little historic town. I went to do a chapter conference on design, and I ran across this building facade, which totally dishonors the meaning of that historic structure. I'm not sure what it is, but it is absurd that it would be in the streetscape of that community. So we want a sense of conveying meaning in the community, and no asset is too small in my judgment or my conclusion. Typically, we get places like this, and people will maintain they are beyond repair, they cannot be saved. Yet the meaning that this structure conveys in the streetscape is tremendous. And get appropriate rehab and design standard, the first step being to prevent its destruction. And appropriate rehab and preservation, we end up with a building like this in the streetscape, and no amount of new construction will ever, ever, ever replace the quality and the meaning that this conveys into that streetscape. And the natural spaces that provide meaning and reinforce people's lives, exceptionally very important. These are the identity, these are identifiers, community. People draw pride from them. I applaud I think this is in Nebraska. This was on Plantation. I think the APA website discussed Nebraska, which had been bypassed by a highway, and yet to express the meaning of that community to people around it, the monuments of towns. Our standards will require, where appropriate, all the monumentation we can get in a community. A community's history is embodied in the built environment and in history books. That's it, or perhaps someone talking. So every historic place or place of some kind of significance should be monumented in community so that you can tell stories. It's an integral part of community design. We did this with a humble water tower, as you see here, a lowly water tower. In the historic photograph, the lower left, you see it looming in the background. That had a hidden meaning in people's lives, and once we discovered it, we had it listed as a landmark and protected because of the design element it conveyed in the community. And we've had a lot of attention. New York Times flew down, did an article about this lowly water tower. The North Mississippi All-Stars was a musical group, put it on their album cover. Now we have the Water Tower Festival. It becomes a rallying point in the community. That's a contemporary photograph of the same thing. So ways to enhance meeting. Everything that they're trying to apply how to evaluate these qualities of order, scale, meaning, activity, and enclosure. And when I work in a community and try to gain an understanding of current design issues in the community, whether it be sign issues or big box design faux pas or franchise architecture, or even just a metal building in an inappropriate place, try to work the qualities. How can those 5 qualities be built back into the townscape? And the matrix that you see here can be used to evaluate that. And for instance, down the left side, you remember, if you recall, I mentioned you're only working in 3 planes: vertical, horizontal, and spatial, or the 3rd dimension. And then there are a finite number of design elements associated with that dimension. It's not a mystery. It's not a quagmire that you can never extricate yourself from. There are a finite number of elements. We can catalog existing standards related to those elements, perhaps photograph existing poor examples of design, and then begin to think about what would a proposed standard be that would produce better design in the streetscape. And we can work it out on a matrix so that certainly the planner or the person evaluating can make judgments, but also so that people in the community can begin to understand the great value that that can be produced through design standards over time. And it is a tremendous value you can build into the streetscape. I show the slide here, substance is more important than style. Invariably, these conversations go to form-based coding. What do you think about form-based coding? We've got to have a form-based code to make this work. Look, form-based codes are great. Many talented people are putting together form-based codes, and if your community can do it, do it. But they are not the solution for every circumstance, and as equal, how should I say this, design quality can be achieved under a set of standards that are far simpler and much easier to implement than through form-based coding. So I caution, or I advise, or I state, do not get caught up in the manner or the style of the code, but rather the qualities that we've just been reviewing: order, scale, enclosure. What regulatory tools can embody those qualities, be it form-based code. And this is one example of the application of design standards over time in the community. The building above the number 1 will indicate a little metal building, and the community determined that this was not an appropriate design standard for the future. And so they implemented a standard that dealt with exterior materials, some landscaping and so forth, and they generated the product that you see on the right above the number 2. There was still dissatisfaction with that, and if you can imagine a vacant lot between these 2 buildings, the comment was, well, a vacant lot, a developer came in to construct between these 2 buildings under a new set of design standards that achieved an even better design quality. And of course, developer reaction when faced with those standards was, you want me to do what? Is the city crazy? And the comment is, look at what's on both sides of me. I can't do that. But thankfully, the design standards in this case were upheld and the developer built to them. And this is a principle that works, and hopefully planners across the country have experienced it, because it is absolutely serendipitous when it occurs. When the community is upgraded in this manner, as this developer did, he looked to the building on his right, or above the number 1, and determined that that did not fit appropriately. And so the process of acquiring that building and then reinvesting, the space on the right, when transformed, it retrofitted, if you will, to a higher design quality. And that's what occurs in communities when design is employed well. We can reverse the natural trend of communities and places going to an ever continuing or progressive state of decline. We can reverse the process redeeming place and make places spiral upward, not down, if you will. That's what that is intended to illustrate. This building here, can you only imagine? What's been built around it has been built to a higher design quality. It is only a matter of time before this little muffler shop is converted and re-imaged in the streetscape in a better way. So community impacts of all that, market building and economics is what we have to argue with our political leaders all the time, and the public for that matter. There is a positive economic benefit of doing design well. You become attractive, desirable, the product is wanted rather than a generic space like everybody else's space. Stewardship of the built environment, I'm a big fan of just the philosophical orientation of being good stewards with place. We are to produce better communities. We are to upgrade them. We are to facilitate community transformation. And if you will recall, the sidewalk issues, the bike issues, as we've gone through these standards, all facilitate healthy place. So good design does result in good health, and that's the conversation in the nation, particularly in the South now. And then the upgrading of quality of life. Ultimately, we say community transformation. So just a couple of inspiring quotes to totally be done. George Washington, who could not give an ear to what George Washington might have to say? It's too probable that no plan we propose will be adopted. Speaking to the difficulty of doing the right thing is what he's doing. But if, to please people, we offer what we ourselves disapprove, how can we defend our work? Let us raise a standard to which the wise and the honest can repair. What's he saying? We must do right. He said, let's do the right thing. Now, obviously, he's talking about the birth of the nation. But even in our townscapes and role as planners, we must do the same. And then this is the concluding slide. John Ruskin, turn of the century philosopher and architect. When we build, let us think we build forever, not for present delight or present use alone, but let it be work that our descendants will thank us for. And let us think as we lay stone on stone, a time will come when they will be held sacred because our hands touch them, and our children can say, look, this our mothers and fathers did for us. It's neat to be about the business of redeeming place and creating place. And I'm done, and there we are for questions.
Very good. Thank you, Bob. And again, to everybody that's been having some audio issues, I tried to send a note to everybody to say we're very sorry. We've been working hard to try to get this resolved. And hopefully the vast majority of you did hear this presentation. In spite of the audio problems, it was of high quality and excellent. As always, on behalf of Belinda and Bob, I have a few questions for Belinda to start with. First off, a question was asked, who sends the Christmas cards that you were referring to?
The ones that we show here, actually our office, my architectural firm, sends those out. But we've seen some other communities where, like the local Main Street office or whatever local chamber, their local primary office sends out something very similar.
Great, thank you. And many of the buildings in your presentation have powerful colors. And is there a specific reason for this?
We typically go back and look at, from a historical standpoint, we go back and look at hints of what colors might have been. Sometimes the colors are a rich sort of brick tone because we know that building originally was not painted or was not stuccoed, and we're trying to get that richness back. But we've gone back and we do kind of a scratch and sniff. We call it paint analysis. And when you repair a window or somebody takes a door frame off, we go look and try to see what the little colors are in the corners to see what original colors might have been. So we've kind of discovered a local palette. of what we know existed here. And some of them we have no clue, but we take that palette of what we know was here and then select colors that go with that palette.
Great, thank you. And Bob, some of your best examples of building and site design were marred by above-ground power poles and lines. Do your design regulations require or incentivize buried power lines with new construction?
The answer to that question is yes. New construction, the power lines cause clutter. There's no question. But it's a reality in which we live. New construction, power lines are required to go underground. The retrofit is very difficult to achieve because it is incredibly expensive, almost to a factor of 10 times the original cost. And so, you know, we live in a mixture of good and bad, and the power line issue is one that is not easily solved, except in places of new construction.
Okay, thank you. And this is from Katie, and I received this question when you were showing your train depot photos, so I assume that this is related to that particular slide. What year or era were the historic photos taken or from?
Is that my train depot, the Hernando
Yes.
Depot? That would have been taken
Yes.
from the mid to late 40s.
Okay, thank you. We were also asked, will the PowerPoint slides be available? And I believe that was a yes, I think on Monday. And I'll let our coordinator answer that better at the end of this. And also, will the sound be fixed for the downloaded video on Monday? I'll let her answer that one too. I hope so, but I don't really know if that's going to be able to be achieved. And okay, I got some other questions coming in. Okay. When recommending commercial design standards, how do planning commissions avoid the misconception that it would be anti-business, i.e. costs involved, et cetera? So, Bob or Belinda, or both of you?
Well,
this is,
Belinda, if you'll
commercial. Yeah, commercial.
Yes, Belinda, if you'll permit me to take a shot first. I'll refer back to the AutoZone example that was in the slides. That building, to achieve the design there, is minimal cost. And when I say minimal, I can't give you a percentage term. There is a cost to produce a better design. However, in the long run, that cost is negligible, and the value that is conveyed on the streetscape, and which makes the community more desirable, and the ease of releasing that building or recycling that building, far, far outweighs in economic terms the cost of putting brick on it to start with. So we have argued that over and over, but it gets easier over time because now we've had enough experience that investors and community leaders and planning commissioners have seen those economics play out in the streetscape.
Okay. Belinda, do you have anything you want to add, or is that?
I do, excuse me, particularly in some of the smaller towns we work in where there's been very little professional involvement in the past. What we run into is more of a fear, and it seems to be more of a fear of the politicians that if they start making demands that folks are not going to come there. And that's been a really big thing to overcome, and examples become the best way to show that. Most of the, especially chain-type stores that come into a community now expect to run into something, and it's not necessarily a hindrance. But when a community doesn't ask, you know, the community isn't going to get perhaps that better thing. So convincing our local folks that they have the right to ask and that their community is worth asking becomes a really important part of that discussion.
Great. And this one from a comment from from Dean and saying, not a question but a comment. Thank you, Bob, for making the point that form-based codes are not the be-all and end-all for every community. Too many people, it seems, have tool obsession and think that this new tool is a solution to every community design problem there is. Okay.
I agree. Good comment.
All right, let's see if we have anything else here.
And I tell you what, as you're
Go ahead.
I was just going to follow up the comment. We starting to see communities now who have either adopted or have had form-based codes proposed or have thought they wanted to go down that trail, really reevaluating that because of some of the challenges in implementing and administering them over time. I don't argue with the quality of what they produce, but when in the practicality of administration and acceptance, sometimes there are issues.
Okay. Another question. Some states have statutes precluding the regulation of aesthetics. Are the design guidelines recommendations, or are they mandatory? Cited as a standard by which a zoning board assesses under discretionary authority a special use or special permit application?
Well, to be exceptionally effective, they should be mandatory. And community design, in my opinion, is absolutely connected to community health, safety, and welfare, which is why we do planning to start with. And the validity of design standards have been, I can't cite the legal case, but it is, they have been upheld legally. I would be interested to know what statute precludes the regulating of aesthetics. But aesthetics is a public health, safety, and welfare issue. To be most effective, they should be mandatory. But if they can't be mandatory, by all means, utilize voluntary standards, introduce them as voluntary, and let them evolve over time. There are a variety of ways depending on the local context.
And there are also incentives that can be paired with them so that if they can't be mandatory, then a package of incentives perhaps could be brought together that would make them attractive and make people want to do them for a variety of reasons.
Okay, great. I am not seeing any additional questions at this point. Okay, I do have one here. Hold on a second. I would take the pedestrian orientation one step further and require a walkway connection between the sidewalk and the strip center or AutoZone Walmart front doors. Okay.
Yes. Agreed. And a very good observation.
Okay. Hold on one second. All right. In addition to webinars like this, what are the best ways for planners to obtain basic training on urban design principles?
Belinda?
Well, I think the best way is to get out there and see what people are doing, and just start looking for examples of towns that you see that look to be successful, and start asking them how to do it. Ask to come be a fly on the wall when they do some things, and learn from how other people are solving the same problems you have.
I couldn't agree more with Belinda's comment, and what I said at the very beginning. Most planners don't do design, and so there's a lot of on-the-job training. But we have plagiarized a lot of places that seem to do things well, and that's okay. There's no need to reinvent. Find those places you love and then investigate and figure out why you love them and what folks are doing to keep them that way.
Okay. Our town was a 60 suburb, so history is not there to be looked at. So we have made up design, Italian, ornate. What do you think? I tell you that wouldn't work too well here in Wyoming, but.
Belinda, I'll be interested in what you have to say on this, but my initial comment is, if there are clues in any environment as to what design direction you should take. For instance, I'm going to say in general in the South, we would not want to take a design path that might be more native to Eastern Europe or some facetious example like that. So there are regional design clues that we can latch on to, and then the other comment is that where there is no design meaning or quality in a sprawl town or suburb or whatever, it must be built. It will have to be built from scratch. That's the way towns got here to start with. So.
And one thing, if the town is from the 1960s, I mean, that's 50 years ago, and it would be worth an effort and a study to look for good, because there may be good there that's so hidden. As our mid-century modern buildings are becoming popular now, and that more 50s, 60s design is becoming, that very modern design is becoming very popular again, there may be gems there that no one realizes are there. And so there actually may be some character in a town such as that that can be built upon, and it's just a very different kind of design environment and design basis. But, I would start there and see what you do have. And also just thinking about all those local things I mentioned, the environment, what is around you, what else can be built upon, what are some things that are unique about your community, and try that. And if it's not strong enough, then as Bob said, bring the community together and figure out what you want to be about. But try to do it in a proactive way with as many people involved as possible, and then go create that by creating the guidelines that help to bring that about. And not trying to be anybody else, but trying to figure out what's best for your community.
Great. Citing the building in front with parking in the rear has raised safety concerns in the night. Please comment.
Safety concerns in the night. I'm not sure that I understand the question and what the safety concern is.
I think they're saying that perhaps that the parking area would be less visible than it would be if it was in the front, if it was tucked behind the building.
Well, they don't have to be entirely behind the building. They can be to the side of the building. To the side and rear is the general principle. Lighting can convey a sense of security, but I've not encountered a major safety issue with siting parking to the side of a building. I'll put it that way.
I think sometimes that's a design issue too. If you're building a building from scratch and you address that from the very beginning in the way you see through the building, or perhaps walkways that lead through the building, or open hallways, or the width of the building in relation to the site, the height, and the sort of, is it a wall or what kind of form that building has, can help a lot in how that rear of the building feels. And of course, just tangible things like lighting and environment and open spaces versus hiding spaces. There are a lot of things that can be done to offset that.
Thank you. Lots of cities will say, we don't want to deter development with design standards. So how would you approach those communities?
I would speak from my experience, and I live and have lived for a long time in a very conservative, small southern town, and we have never, ever, ever chased off anyone because of reasonable design standards. In fact, quite the opposite has occurred. We've begun to attract now, and there have been plenty of threats. I'm not coming, I can't do it, just like the developer I mentioned in my examples. If the standards are reasonable, and if it can be demonstrated that the community benefits, the owner benefits, and so forth, and it can be demonstrated, I've just never experienced losing a client over reasonable or good design.
I think a lot of it is about where are those people coming from. If they're coming from the standpoint of just financially, we think we will lose businesses, then the more evidence you can show to the contrary, just again case studies and examples of how other communities have had guidelines and whether they've helped them or whether they've hurt them, just tangible sort of arguing points that can be put in front of the decision makers to show that there are many, many cases where this is a positive and not a negative. And on the other side, I mean, there are a lot of examples where there is no legislation in a community and no guideline, and how they can become diffused, and the problems that can occur by not having the guidelines as well. I think the bottom line is it's about education and information, making sure all the information is there for them to make their decisions on.
Is there any pressure to create high-density, mixed-use development around the train station as there is in the Northeast? How do you deal with that type of development from an aesthetic standpoint?
Well, the answer to the train station I showed was no, because the discussion now is the potential of that line being abandoned. I mean, we don't have that kind of train, pedestrian traffic that is present in the Northeast. It's just not in this region.
Okay. Moving, wait a minute, hold on a second. Okay, I think we kind of answered that one. Trying to pick through as we're starting to run out of time here. There was a question, Belinda, about the types of incentives that can be made available to encourage good design. Do you have a thought on that, or Bob too?
Well, there are some out there on the federal level, like historic tax credits, and there's some other tax credits. It gets kind of complicated, but part of it is, I think, when we go into a community, is it's worth doing research at that time to determine what is applicable to that community. And there's always a variety, and putting those into a document, putting them somehow into the guidelines or an amendment to the guidelines, so that base of information is there. That becomes really important. There have been communities who have created low-interest loan pools, for example, through the corporation of their banks, so that becomes an incentive. If you agree to do the work within this guideline, then you're eligible for this 2% money or something very attractive. And others have created grant programs where, if you do this work by these guidelines, we'll grant you the first $5,000 or a percentage of your project, et cetera, et cetera. And there are also a lot of communities, and this depends on statutes, but tax abatements, sort of like industries get. Quite often there are those on the books that can go to any type redevelopment, quite often geared toward historic cores, so that folks that come in and do work in that community within a certain guideline can then get a local abatement on their taxes. So their taxes don't increase, say, for 7 years or something like that.
Thank you. And I guess this is probably a perfect kind of a sum-up question for both of you. We've kind of answered it to an extent, but saying it one more time I think will be pretty important. Are you not afraid that commercial development will walk away from your town with these types of standards to go somewhere nearby without any of these standards?
Well, the question is, are we afraid? No, we're not afraid. Again, I reiterate my experience. We've never lost a commercial client because of reasonable standards of design, and the operative word is reasonable. It can't be over the top. It's got to be doable, workable, and it must be reasonable. So no, not from my standpoint.
I think another thing that I've seen help a lot in communities is just an openness of discussion with the companies that want to come in, so that the guidelines are not necessarily absolute rocks set in stone. There is no even talking about it, but helping to educate these companies that come to town and show the standards and have some options in the standards, so that if one thing won't work, there might be another way. But being able to work and talk and answer those kind of questions at the very front, I think, is an important part of it.
Great. Thank you both very much, and thank you to all of you that tuned in today for the teleconference. We certainly appreciate your involvement, participation, and I'll turn it over now to our webmaster, I believe.
Thank you, Joanne.
All right, well, thank you so much, Joanne and Bob and Belinda. It was a great presentation. For those of you who are still in attendance, I'm just going to go through a few reminders. First off, to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM, select today's date, which is Friday, November 4th, and then select today's webcast, Design Guidelines for Small Towns and Rural Places. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. Also, we are recording today's webcast, and you will be able to find this along with a 6-slide per page PDF of both Bob and Belinda's presentations at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. This does conclude today's session, and I want to thank everyone again for attending.